Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Happy Sad podcast, where you're joined by myself, Blake, Joe, Ella, and Raffan. Unfortunately, the elusive Lily Rivers cannot join us again today, but obviously we did a little introduction last episode, and I think we all really enjoyed the open conversation we had, and it was really nice to, even though we know each other, continue to learn a little bit about one another. And we thought we'd explore a few topics today, and one that we feel is completely relevant to something that could be experienced by those who understand what the Happy Sad Club's all about. And that topic is loneliness. And we're going to see what that kind of meanders into. But I suppose it's always nice to open up with an idea of what we think the word means, whether that be for our personal experiences or in a more definitive sense. And as a result, I'd love for one of you, maybe Ella, to share a definition if you have one.
Yeah, so I looked at the website of the Campaign to End Loneliness, and they have a definition on there that says loneliness is a subjective, unwelcome feeling of lack or loss of companionship. It happens when there is a mismatch between the quantity and quality of the social relationships that we have and those that we want. So they were very specific about it being the wanting of that social interaction but not having it, rather than you not wanting to interact with anyone. I suppose you wouldn't feel as lonely in that sense, but it's that disparity between the wanting to connect with people and maybe not being able to, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've thought about, and I know Joe's thought about as well, is that difference between loneliness and being alone. And I think they're two things that are very muddied, because loneliness is more of an introspective thing, more of a subjective emotion or response, whereas being alone is more of an objective thing potentially. And I think that it's really interesting how they don't necessarily have to be the same thing. You can be alone and not feel lonely, and you can be with a room full of people and feel quite lonely. And I don't know if that's something one of you wants to expand on, obviously, because it's quite an interesting thing to experience.
I personally think that for me, half the time is where I've realised that I'm lonely. The concept of being in a whole room, from my experience, most of my loneliness when I was at secondary school actually, and you're being with groups of people all day, and it's like even more like it's like almost louder, like in your head, the fact you feel lonely, as opposed to when you are literally alone. Whether you're feeling lonely within that, like being alone or not, I feel like it screams like louder when you're actually with people and you still feel that sense of, for me, that kind of lack of belonging, or that kind of not fitting in, or that kind of sense of wanting to find that connection with people and not having it. So I find, whereas I love being alone. I love, leave me alone with a book. Super happy with that. Don't talk to me. But but when it really hits hard, I definitely think it's more resounding when it's like within that kind of group kind of aspect. I don't know if it's the same for any of you, if that's kind of, or if you kind of have felt that kind of loneliness when you are more alone in that sense. I don't know. What do you guys?
I feel like mine's the opposite, because mine is quite because I experience a lot of anxiety that stops me from doing things that all of my peers are doing. I'm kind of on my own timeline, and that's where the loneliness is, because all my friends have been able to like move out and move away, or my family are off on their holidays, or everyone's kind of doing their own things, getting into relationships, getting jobs, and I'm still kind of like stumbling behind. So that's where my loneliness is of like people not quite being on that same level as me, and me not being able to catch up. So when I am around other people, I feel like the loneliness is gone. It's very, I feel like I'm with people and I'm fine. But then in those moments where I'm alone and I'm thinking like, oh, everyone's kind of like moving a bit faster than me, and everyone's kind of doing all of this stuff that I'm not doing, it's a very lonely place to be in. Which is quite interesting, though, that it can be so different for everyone, that feeling of loneliness.
I guess that's where, in the definition you gave that was really good, It's all about subjectivity, really.
Yeah.
Whereas being like physically alone can be a bit more objective. The actual feeling of loneliness is not necessarily as tied to like physical isolation, whereas in your case, I suppose it more so is. Whereas for Afan, maybe not so much. I think that's why it's important to have those kind of definitions. I really like the idea of like it's kind of like a discrepancy between a feeling of connection, I suppose, and that can be as high as low or low as you want. It can be different kinds of connection. It could be relationships or friendships or family, or just from yourself, really, I suppose. But
yeah, I think Joe brings in like the most important word there, which is connection. And there's an author called Lars Svensson, and he wrote a book called A Philosophy of Loneliness, which is a brilliant book. And in it, he writes, open quote, "I consider loneliness to be an emotional response to the fact that one's desire for a connection is not satisfied." And specifically that one's desire for a connection is so huge because in Ella's case, the connection comes from the lack of other people potentially, or the lack of opportunity. And in Rafan's case, the lack of connection comes from the surroundings she's in. Maybe she's in the wrong environment. And at the time, potentially you were in the wrong environment for creating that sense of connectivity. I know that's something I've experienced as well. I think I've felt like I maybe have felt lonely from not being understood, or probably, as Joe kind of alluded to, that sense of loneliness within oneself where I didn't really understand myself either. And that's quite an isolating experience. But it's really nice to kind of think about those things. And obviously, when we bring in the idea of loneliness and alone, the more positive tint to that is solitude, which is that willingness and that pleasure in being alone. And I don't know what you all think, but I think it's really interesting how at points solitude was once my loneliness. And it's funny how I've used that as a reference of being able to understand those periods of being able to be isolated. Because I suppose isolation might breed a sense of loneliness, even though you don't have to be isolated to feel alone or lonely.
I think there's a difference in that forced isolation and like not that you're wanting to be alone but having to be alone. That's maybe where the negative creeps in. Whereas when it's a consensual choice to be on your own, there's that lack of loneliness because you're making that choice to be on your own and you're doing your own thing. And I spend a lot of time on my own and I don't feel particularly lonely physically. I'm fine being on my own. I have a lot to do and I'm fulfilled, but mentally there is a loneliness.
I think it's like you said though, it's that choice. Having a choice of I'm choosing to be alone right now. I'm choosing to have my own space. You know, I live alone, and I love it. You know, that I choose to be alone and I choose to invite people to be with me or or go out and I think again, like you said, that having that option is really key to that. Whereas like when you're forced, like I said in my experience, into a school that you have to go to, you're not choosing your environment or choosing who's in your classes or things like that, and choosing, it's very different, isn't it? Like when you're kind of forced into those situations. However, on the flip side, I find that having gone through that and been lonely for quite a few years, and as a result of that, I kind of just delved into books and things, but I feel like it's actually enhanced my ability to create connections because I've not given myself the option. Like it's almost like a skill for me now. Like it's what people are my thing. Like all my job, my nearly 10 years of work experience, it's always been around people. It's always been about chatting and creating connections, and now it's become something that I now almost borderline and thrive on. And I feel like if I didn't experience the intense and long loneliness that I've had, I don't know if I'd be as good at what I can do now socially. I don't know, maybe not, who knows, but I feel like there is positivity to it.
Do you know what I think is so nice about someone's ability to be lonely is that it shows their ability to feel, their willingness or want to connect. If someone feels lonely, It shows that they're capable of an element of friendship. They're capable of intimacy or love, or they're open to experience potentially. They're just not having those experiences, or whether that's environmental, whether that's an internal thing. I think it's something that I'm very conscious of now, is that those that aren't lonely clearly don't feel the need to nourish that thing. They're either very satisfied where they are, which is amazing, or they simply don't possess that element. And I think loneliness does a brilliant job of reflecting how social a creature we are, and how important it is that we use other people to reference ourselves. I like the idea that you just can't be a human in isolation. And maybe it's because of these wants to connect and have experiences that we kind of are shaped as humans in the first place. So when we have that feeling of loneliness, that, again, connecting element, we might fail to have that reflection on ourselves. So I know that's making it a little bit more philosophical, but that's just something that I think is really lovely about it, about what loneliness can be as an indicator of a person.
I recently read The Handmaid's Tale, and I know the subject matter it doesn't really relate so much to this topic, but a lot of the book talks about how your proximity to other people is a lot of what makes you who you are. And when you're stripped of a name, or you're stripped of eye contact or touch,
Identity.
you kind of cease to exist in yourself, even, because you're not relating to other people, like you said.
Or it's like even the way Atwood writes, studied this way, the way Atwood writes, and she focuses on certain things in excessive detail, like an egg. And, obviously it kind of goes through the symbols and things like that, but like she touches on so much detail on these little like things, because there's, what else can they look at? Like you said, there's the simplicity and the way they're kind of having to be forced within a category and live that way. And then obviously you fast forward, and then they have all these connections and things they're allowed to do in these hidden places, and it kind of emphasizes that for sure.
Yeah,
that's a really good book. Like you said, Sully wouldn't have chosen that just off the cuff, but reflect on it. Yeah, good choice to kind of really hone in on that.
Yeah,
different way of how loneliness can affect, for sure.
Yeah, I think
it looks like we're already doing a book club inside this podcast as well.
Yeah,
we've not got the trademark on it, so we can do that here too. I think that'd be good.
Yeah, the Happy Sad Book Club. I'm down.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, though, Joe, on things, especially in terms of the more philosophical, kind of poetic side of things?
It's funny that you throw it at me when you use that word.
Well, for those that are interested, we have actually done a brief podcast on loneliness from a different angle on the How Absurd. Shameless plug.
Yeah, check out episode 2. It's one of our most popular. Yeah, I liked what you said about when you started bringing solitude into the conversation as well, and how perhaps solitude's seen as the positive spin on loneliness, or whatever the thing that encompasses both loneliness and solitude is. But I think there's something a bit more noble in people that are experiencing more loneliness than solitude, because like you said, if people are very comfortable with their solitude, I'm sure a lot of us can be, that's great. But there's sometimes a risk that you can fall so far into that, maybe even tricking yourself and then being well, I don't really need other connections now. I've got all the connections I need. And I think it's a really dangerous thing to underestimate our ability to sometimes fool ourselves in that kind of way. I think I read a good quote earlier that was someone I'd never heard of, but I'd like to read more of, which was, Arafin, you actually probably be able to pronounce it because it seems like they're French, but it's Honoré de Balzac, which is a French novelist and playwright.
He's very, very famous. Yeah, Honoré de Balzac.
Honoré de Balzac, yeah.
Yeah.
They said that solitude is fine, but you need someone to tell that solitude is fine. I think it was just a really simple, there's sort of no other way to look around it, but yeah, I just like that idea that Blake brought up, which was
that's a really good point. I think as well, it kind of reminded me, I spoke to my boyfriend just about this, and he said he was talking about having a partner or having friends kind of make your experiences more real. If you didn't celebrate or talk about these things that has happened to you, it almost feels is life real? Are you going what you're going through? If you're not living through those people with like in those moments too. Like imagine that it doesn't have that same appreciation that you can have, you know. And he was saying like, obviously that having a partner or like really close family that you can like have these experiences with and kind of adds to that, makes it feel more real, makes it feel more concrete in that sense as well.
I feel like I have. Go on.
I was going to say, I guess that's where a lot of people find some solace in maybe writing things down instead of telling others. Not that that's better, although one's maybe better than the other. There's no doubt that like communion and telling people about your experiences and experience things together is definitely the better way to go about things. But I feel like there's a lot of writers that are out there that have just sort of, you know, not just buried their heads in books, but have just buried their heads in their own writing and just tried to sort of justify maybe their extreme solitude that way by saying, if I write it down and write a 900-word novel on this, not 900-word, 900-page, 900 words, not a novel. That's a long essay.
That's just a nov.
That's it.
I feel like
now people can hear
I'm so
the
glad
laughing that goes on in the background.
Yeah.
It needed to happen. Laugh at everything.
Yeah, she laughs at everything. She's not saying that that's funny.
Yeah, that's thanks for highlighting that point, Joe. Yeah. And you could use the word Blake interchangeably with brilliant then. All right, Raffin, you might have to mute yourself. But that Joe's section, Raffin segueing into that conversation with her boyfriend, has brought me to such a brilliant quote by Alexis Bates. And this quote is very rare that I'm completely knocked off my feet with a quote, but this one just captivated me. And it's the topic is loneliness in love. And it's open quote, "What is lonelier, to grieve or not love anyone enough to?" And that just killed me at the time of reading it, because it's such a powerful thing of, yeah. For those of you visual watchers, if we get that far, Ella's just impersonated a dagger to the heart. But yeah, that what is lonelier, to grieve or not love anyone enough to? And it's this trade-off. And I don't know what it is, but it reminds me of a quote from Nausea by Sartre. I know Joe's read it. I don't know if you have, Raffaella. But again, I'm going to butcher a French word, but Roquentin, I don't know how you say his name. One of the quotes he says in that book is, open quote, "I would be even more alone in death than in life." And there's something about that quote as well. I know it's become very quotey, I'm sorry. But they're just so profound, because they create this choice that, I don't know why I'm playing with that makes things sound so simplified. And yet at the same time, there is something incredibly profound in that. And I think when I think about the idea of to grieve or not love anyone enough to, it does highlight this idea of the willingness to experience, to connect, to share these things. And I suppose be willing to risk loneliness for the sake of finding something that makes you feel, you know, the opposite of that, something beautiful.
It's about being like we should be grateful that we're human enough to feel what we feel, you know. And I think that's so important. Like that's what makes us human, you know. It's going through these emotions, embracing these emotions. Like it's like what we said on the last podcast, you've got to have the lows to feel the highs as well. Like you've got to love, if you're going to grieve something, you know, like this quote, you know, to not grieve, to not feel anything. I kind of just feel like, oh, what's the point? Like, I just feel like you need to have these things, you know. But also, it's not even just, you know, things like touch as well. You know, like they have statistics. I couldn't tell you like right away, but like hugging, they say you should hug someone every day because it will help with this. Or for example, like it's healthier to have like human connections and touch, then like it can actually like bring down like stress levels and things like that. Like it's all actually so many factors to do with touch, like the touch of a loved one, that can also change our health too, you know, whether that be mental or even literally even physical. And I think that's quite amazing too, that kind of the power of that connection can have, and how loneliness, again, that aspect of, well, I don't know, I feel like that aspect of being alone, that it kind of offsets it a little bit. Like you can still be lonely in a room full of people, but I guess it kind of depends on the circumstance, to be fair. I'm kind of tying myself a little knot here because I've got so many ideas running through my head. I'm like, oh my god, which one do I choose?
No, I like the idea that it's bringing it a bit back to the physical though, I feel like most of the time when I think about loneliness, I try to like completely separate the two, and you think about more of like an emotional or mental discrepancy and connection. But like the physical side of it is definitely a massive part of it. I think sometimes living with family in the past, it was probably a bit easier to, you know, have a hug every day. If your parents maybe wouldn't let you go to bed without some sort of contact, and then you move away, and depending on like if you've got a significant other nearby or how intimate you are with your friends in terms of hugging all the time, you can sort of go quite a lot of time without realizing that you haven't had a hug in a while. Something as simple as that. And it's like, because there's not really I haven't really got like a whiteboard that says this many days since my last hug, so I can't keep track of it. But sometimes you could probably go quite a bit longer than you'd like to, and you don't really realize the benefits until you have it.
That's what pets are for.
Yeah. True.
But it's so true.
I feel like as well that it's like this idea of grieving. You get used to things, don't you? You get used to, for example, sharing a bed with someone. And like whether you're split with that partner or, you know, passing away or something, and then all of a sudden not having that someone there, that's when it hurts the most. It's like, you know, when it's the moments that you're used to that you probably take for granted, those little moments that you have all the time, and then when they're not there, that loneliness and grieving as well, I guess, but also that kind of that can combine as well in a way. I guess loneliness in a way is like grieving. It's like you are grieving for a connection, like, or that you know you could have sometimes.
Yeah, it ties in with the definition again, because it's just all about that discrepancy really between like, it's basically what your expectations of connection and what you're getting right now.
Yeah,
and if there's any change in that at any point, like, and the danger is you can get used to any level on that, like high or low. Although being in like a lonely state's most of the time, for the most part, a negative experience. I don't want to speak too definitively, but you can definitely even get used to being down there and maybe convince yourself over time that maybe that's solitude instead, and then you don't seek anything else. Just to repeat myself from earlier, but I think it's an important point.
But that's exactly where I was going to go, because I suppose I was curious, and when we talk about grief and these intimate things, that's assuming that we have them. And I suppose for a lot of people, they don't have those things in the first place. So I wonder if there's like an inverse relationship or an opposite outcome where you get so used to that loneliness, that feeling, that actually changing that becomes a bit of a beast and a difficult thing to progress from. And that's quite an interesting thing to process, isn't it? Is that becoming so used to your loneliness, as you touched on, Joe, like that you assume it's solitude, when actually, other than by making a decision internally, how do you know what that is? And how do you break the pattern of loneliness? You know, that's such a big task. That's like saying, don't be unhappy. Like, it's just not that simple. And I suppose that's something that we can all be affected by.
I can kind of speak on that personally, as someone that like dropped out of school in sixth form, and I'm chronically single. I've never been in a relationship. It is then hard, like that loneliness sets in, believe me. Like, it is hard to break out of that, and I find it now harder to connect with people. Like, it gives me so much anxiety to like, I want so badly to like make friends and to like connect with people and to like break that cycle of loneliness. But then you get to that moment and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, am I saying the right thing? Like, being a human is hard enough as it is. But when you like strip that kind of like human interaction away and then fall back into it or try to, there's definitely that kind of like loneliness becomes comfortable almost. It's almost like, let me just sit with this loneliness and not try and change it, because that seems just so difficult.
It gives you, like you said, that gives you anxiety. Or like, I remember I didn't really have a best friend. Like, I remember Blake always grew up with Kane, our god brother. Like, they were all separate. They had it, like, you know, like Lily always had her best mate growing up. I didn't really have a best friend until probably like year 11. I was always in little groups, always in big groups, never really fit in. even if there were family in those groups as well, just never really clicked. And then, yeah, year 11. And I tell you now, I just remember the paranoia of, is this how to be a good friend? Like, is this normal? Or like getting in my head, because I'm still a paranoid person now, but the point is that I would overthink like more. Because I didn't want to ruin this. So I'm like, oh god,
yeah,
I've actually found someone that will tolerate me, like, or understands me, or doesn't it? Even if it's not even that, but just actually openly wants to spend time with me and just me, and tries to. And then the paranoia of, like, am I doing this right? Or or
yeah.
too scared almost to be myself in fear.
There's such a desperation, I think, when it comes to loneliness that no one wants to admit. That it brings you to such a desperate place of like, I will do anything to connect with anyone to just not feel lonely. And it can take you to do like some really silly places and do some really silly things. But again, like we were saying, isn't that kind of, to flip it on its head, isn't that such a lovely thing that we're so keen to connect with people that we'll pretty much do anything to get there.
I think the only danger is when, like, the only worry is if that keenness were to go anywhere. Like, if it manifests in something that, I don't really know exactly what you mean by silly. I guess you could get into something that's like actually dangerous, like if you're putting yourself somewhere that you shouldn't, or if it's just putting yourself somewhere that's definitely miles outside of your comfort zone.
I guess like losing yourself in the pursuit of connecting with other people is what I mean by like being silly about it. Like you lose that sense of who you are because you're willing to assimilate to anyone, and you kind of like, I'll be anyone if it will bring me a group.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if, like, see, it will have its negative sides to it, but like Blake always likes to say, so long as you can come back, I think it can be okay to like lose yourself in things sometimes, because like maybe we don't always want to be completely hyper aware of like who we are and like maintain ourselves in that way. I think that's where like extended periods of isolation and being lonely, you kind of almost maybe develop a bit. You could sometimes think that you developed almost like too much self-awareness, or like, this is the type of person I am, and convince yourself that you understand yourself so much that when I then go out and try and socialize with people, they won't understand me as well as I understand me. And so then you like feel that discrepancy and connection that is loneliness, essentially.
But then there's so many facets of us. Like, you're never the same person with everyone, are you? You're not going to be the same person you are with your parents versus your best mate or your partner. And I feel like it's something that I think when you're a kid, that's kind of what you kind of grow up trying to, me and Blake have discussed this before, to the point of like, isn't our lives are almost trying to pick up evidence of who we are based off people we've met, things we've reflected on, things we've done, reactions, emotions. We're constantly collecting evidence on ourselves. And I think having that kind of like this loneliness aspect, or like that kind of when you're a child, like, or teenager, whatever age that is, you might change a little bit and then realize that didn't feel right, that was not me, and then you learn from it, and that's another bit of evidence. Okay, that didn't suit me, that wasn't for me. So I feel like sometimes having that loneliness or having that desperation or changing a little bit or figuring that out is like you figuring out, is this a facet that I want to have as part of my visage, part of my face, part of my, however you want to say it, if that makes sense.
Are any of you Simpsons fans?
Yes.
Yes.
Isn't this just giving such like Lisa Simpson vibes? Like, she was just doing her thing. She was always so desperate to connect. Like, she would do cool things and be fake. And Bart was just this like enigma, just floating through. And yeah, I feel like Lisa was just this little lonely, lovely person. But that was just a little tangent. Anyway, I want to go into statistics.
There's a guitar in the back instead of like a saxophone.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to tie in some things that we've talked about. And I want to quickly talk about something that kind of we've touched on a little bit. And it's something that Lars Svensson brings up in his book, A Philosophy of Loneliness. It's something I'll probably reference again. But most of his work about Scandinavia, particularly Norway, and he found a really interesting thing out and again, this only speaks on behalf of the Norwegian population he worked with, but he found that those who considered themselves lonely often had no change in loneliness when they saw friends, or it was very small amounts of change. They felt lonely regardless. Again, this is a statistical outcome, so it's not necessarily on behalf of every individual. Whereas he found that those that only felt lonely now and then, on like a subjective scale, they had much greater improvements in seeing friends compared to those that consider themselves lonely all the time, which prompts the question to the reader, and as I want to prompt to you, is there the potential that loneliness is either an environmental or an individual response? And can it be both? Can it be one? Can it be, just what are like your initial thoughts of hearing that? Because we have touched on it, but I just think when you reframe it in that way, just is there anything it makes you think? And to contribute to that, sorry, if you have any statistics you want to include in this, because obviously it's a very statistically heavy topic, if you're willing to go there, feel free to share them, because it'd be nice to discuss them.
I think it's difficult to quantify loneliness, isn't it? You can't quite put a number on it, or for me at least, I couldn't tell you how often I feel lonely. I feel lonely when I think about being lonely sometimes, or explaining my loneliness to people. So I think it's difficult for me. Like I said, like being in a room full of people, I'm not lonely, but being on my own and kind of reflecting, that's when it kind of seeps in of like, okay, I'm kind of on my own path here, and I'm, there's people on that path, but we're quite far away from each other. And often when I explain my loneliness to people in my life that don't experience the same mental health issues I do, I think there can be a lot of thinking about, I think about a lot of things that they don't, probably. And it's like, I'll often say to people, like, I'd love to, complain about my job. I'd love to complain about public transport, like, because that means I'm in the world. That means I exist in, in the context of other people. But I can't do that right now. So, there's all these things that you take for granted when you're not lonely. And I think it's just interesting to think about, like, what can make someone lonely. What, your loneliness is very individual to you. Your loneliness is not going to look like someone else's, and the things that make you feel lonely, someone else might absolutely revel in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I like, in the same way that when Blake in the past, and we've spoken about the kind of misunderstanding of sadness, or like your sadness is your own.
Mm-hmm.
You can just say the exact same thing. Like so many of the same parallels with loneliness, like it is our loneliness, and it can take loads of different forms, and hence again it's just very, very subjective. But I'd really liked the path you took it down there, though, in terms of like, I guess it's like a bit like a sense of communal, I don't know, a communal path, or like a shared weight. Like it's not even like when you talk about people being on different paths to you, it's not even like you'd need to necessarily have good friends that are on the same path, but just like an understanding that there are people, even if you just like had an awareness that there are other people that are going down a similar path to you.
Yeah.
I feel like that would maybe be like quite a big help as well. And I guess that's where this whole thing that we're doing comes into play.
Yeah.
Really, in terms of like understanding that, not necessarily offering up solutions for everything, but it's like
just to have relatability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like the relatability is in itself a part of a solution, if you had to have one.
It's an antidote,
really, isn't it? Like,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Campaign to End Loneliness actually said that being lonely can increase the risk of early mortality by 26%, which I think is shocking, because it's a thing that feels like it can be fixed so easily. Or maybe it can't, I don't know, but in my head it seems like something that, if you're talking to other people, if you're around other people, if you're, being self-aware about your loneliness, it seems like something that can be at least, put a plaster over. So the fact that it can literally kill you is crazy.
Or even if you look at things like old people, for example, they did. I couldn't tell you the numbers. I'm really bad at remembering things like this. But like they did like a survey on old people, and like obviously, for example, going shopping for a lot of people, especially like who are lonely, and like going shopping and having that interaction with the person on the till is sometimes their only interaction in that week or that few days that they have. And it's this kind of idea of like it is crippling. Like it can, you know, when you've had a life surrounded with people and then obviously or not, and or they kind of say that like old people's homes have much higher like you can live longer there because of the connections that they have, as opposed to someone living like an older person living alone for so long. And it does change that. Like it generally, yeah, it's just really sad, like the loneliness in like older people. And you know, I think we forget that it isn't. I think that actually probably is the biggest age range that loneliness really sets in too.
The one that always gets to me is just the thought of your typical widow or widower who's been married for 40, 50 years potentially, and then the idea of them losing that significant other. Like in terms of like an intensity of loneliness, that must be insane when we talk about it being that discrepancy and being so used to that level of, it's almost like you wouldn't judge them for not seeing the need for maybe other high level forms of connection at that point, because they've had someone, like one individual who's literally been like side-strapped to them for this many years, and then to lose them all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it must be horrendous, really. But it's interesting that actually, like, on that, I was looking through that same campaign to end loneliness, and it does list a lot of the sort of, out of the UK, the groups that it thinks are most affected, and like just as easily you see like 16 to 24-year-olds on there. So like it's like no one's really safe from it.
Yeah.
There are groups that are going to be more disposed, but like it's kind of relentless, really. It comes for everyone, whether you're sort of young, old, rich or poor is another big one. Like imagine loneliness amongst people that have sort of maybe lost themselves in more material pursuits successfully, and then you kind of assume that they might not have that same feeling of loneliness just because of what they've got around them, even if they have loads of people around them as well. There's no doubt that it can probably seep into their lives too.
Which I think that's why we're so keen for so many different people to share their stories here, is that relatability and that, you know, seeing that other people are in the same position as you. It can deplete that loneliness slowly, to just know that, okay, other people are in that same mindset, we're experiencing the same things. And I would assume, I would hope that the people that will share their experiences here will be open for people to approach them about what they've said. And in that sharing, hopefully we can be kind of like an antidote to someone's loneliness, at least one person.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's really important for us to have this community and to have like friendship and relationships that you feel like you can share with us, you can share with the page, you can, you know, you can talk about what you're going through and feel a bit less lonely.
Yeah, this is an opportunity for connection, you know, and even especially when you look at like the variety of age range, as you said, it's got to the point now it's harder to make friends. Like you know, actually they done a study on young people, and it's like because of social media again is that kind of hard aspect of it is amazing to the point they now have an app like Tinder and Hinge to find friends. Like it's not for romantic relationships, it's to find friends, because we do not go out and push ourselves to do hobbies or socialise as much as previous generations where technology was not in the you know, I remember being a kid and we would go on the field, we had to go around our friend's house, knock on the door, can they play out, blah blah blah, all of that. Don't get that anymore. Kids go home and go on a screen and play Fortnite and hope that their friends are on there, you know, or something like that. And so trying to find new friends that are outside for hobbies, I find that generally kids do not do as much anymore anyway. So I feel like it's that idea of like socializing has shifted, has changed. It is harder, let's say, to make friends. I know so many people that move cities, for example. I know so many people that didn't go to university, just moved to a city for a job and find it really hard, other than work colleagues or people that move country, who really struggle to find friends if they, and then trying to find a hobby and things. Like, I think, and that is another thing of loneliness as well. People moving somewhere else and having no one, or not many people can, and especially with a cultural shock or cultural difference, can be a huge thing for loneliness. And so it kind of doesn't surprise me, actually, that it's kind of 16 to 24, or especially kind of that it's still going still trying to, do that sort of thing, I think is a big role as well. So it doesn't actually surprise me that some of probably age has shifted a little bit,
Yeah, I think uni's a good example for it as well, in terms of like, I'm massively grateful for what the uni experience is, in terms of it kind of gives you a bit of a leg up to moving to another city, in a way that you're kind of thrown in with all these people that most of them are also moving somewhere where they don't really know many people. And I think that's a really great thing. But it's interesting how on the flip side of that, despite being in a space where you're surrounded by so many people potentially like-minded, you can go to places where you can do similar hobbies and learn similar things. And yeah, I feel like anecdotally, and in my own experience as well, like the experience of loneliness at uni, particularly maybe the first few months that you're there, can be quite high. Obviously different if you actually go and like live in there in your first couple of years in halls, or if you stay at home. But even like going and living in, I think although you like can eventually make some quite close friendships, I think you spoke about earlier, Raf, in terms of not having like a best friend until a certain point. And I think the impact of that, obviously turning out fine and you're going to make plenty more best friends, but like the idea that when you maybe move to a new city and then you might quickly have loads of like surface level friends, but no one there is really hitting that like depth of relationship yet, or connection, and that takes a bit more time to build.
Yeah.
And thus maybe you feel like you can't be completely vulnerable with anyone in that space, whether it be at uni or just moving anywhere generally, and being around a lot of people that you don't necessarily feel like you can be properly vulnerable with. And then I guess if you can't do that, then loneliness just inevitably ensues, because there's not that connection there. And I think especially adding to the mix that you're in a completely different location physically, then there's the physical element of it as well.
It's also a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort to create new connections and friendships. Like, I think it's something that
I think that's a good thing.
Really good. Yeah. I think it's a great thing, but like, but it's also, I guess it kind of depends on, it's a two-side thing as well, but it's sometimes we can get so swept up in career, in life, in health, that like you have to make time for it. You have to make time to check in with your friends, to see them, to, you know what I mean? Like it does take a lot of effort. It's important, it's healthy, but you need to put the effort in.
But I don't think that's a shock. I don't think that's something that we should be surprised about. I think, it comes back to that simple fact that you cannot be a human being in isolation. I really believe that actually there's everything available to us to be as social as we'd like.
Yeah.
The difficulty is in letting go of the feeling of it. Like, I think now more than ever, we can actually connect with as many people as we want, because not only can we do physical things, we have got online presences, we have got ways. Look at what we're all doing right now. We're in 4 different parts of the UK, and we're all connecting and having a moment. And a lot of people can connect with the words we say from wherever they are in the world. That was not something that our parents really could have ever done the same way. And I feel blessed for that opportunity. But I don't know. I just think it's societally we have changed as a species. We've evolved with the things we have available to us, and I think we've just become more aware of space and time. Space not being with aliens and Mars, space being time in that sense. Just to clear those up for anyone that was confused. But I don't know. I think
for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Well, it's,
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I was going to do a demonstration with my hands, but then I realised this is a podcast. But no, I don't know. I think it's a bit of an oxymoron, the current experience of what loneliness is, and I think that's why I wanted to ask you all why this could be an environment or an individual thing. And I think the truth is it's the chicken and the egg, because the individual can breed loneliness into an environment, and a lack of environment can breed loneliness into an individual. And I think that it is that willingness to kind of expose yourself. And I think
It's
that
the vulnerability, isn't it? It's
100%.
a difficult thing to be vulnerable and connect.
But I think that's what we want to do, is like, that's why we've all done this, is to create an environment that's less intimidating, because everyone's doing it. It's like, let's make being vulnerable cool, you know.
It's
And
also
I don't
being
know.
in touch with yourself and being truthful with yourself. There's not, you know, I think we've all been to it, like, you know, gone to a thing, and you're just not in the mindset, and you're not there, and you know, and that can feel lonely, and it's not anyone's fault. It's sometimes just, you know, mental health, or you're on a low, and you just don't. You could be surrounded by your best mates and still feel a bit apart from them at that time because of mental state at the time, for example, or tiredness, or those things do happen, and that can also kind of breed maybe a shortened, like, you know, sense of loneliness as well, when you're like, your frequency isn't the same, you know, as well, and even if they are your friends too. But I do feel like it's that sense of, bring it back, that kind of sense of being truthful with yourself and connecting with yourself as well, to connect, therefore to connect with others too. That makes sense.
I also think I'm the sort of person that I love social media for what it's done for me, with the fact that I can't leave my house very often. And I'm the sort of person that if someone I don't know posts something on their story and it's something that I'm interested in, or they look nice, or, you know, I will straight away be in their DMs. Oh my God, love your top. Like, oh my God, love that album. You know, I'm very like gung ho about it. But I think there is that, now we're so worried about rejection, and we're worried about being embarrassed, or, you know, being laughed at. But when you push past that hurdle, you know, some of my closest friends have been made through just connecting on one thing, on a band, or on the fact that one of us has messaged the other just to say, hi, I think you're cool. And it can be such a vulnerable place to be in, to reach out. It feels really exposing, but it's such an easy way to connect, and it doesn't even have to go anywhere. You can literally just talk to someone for a day, but it can, you know, kill that loneliness for a little while, maybe.
And especially in certain environments as well, like, it is, yeah, just like you said, just commenting, just like, or like, even I overly share my Instagram story, I know that for a fact, but I know that through that I have such a community on Instagram alone, because of how many people respond, and you create these connections, and you kind of create, it's almost like the drunk girls bathroom kind of vibe, like, you know, and you're like, oh my God, you look so great, and you're all a bit drunk,
Yeah,
and
dump your boyfriend.
yeah, and you're all like complimenting each other, and the next thing you know, you're dancing. It's that kind of idea as well, like, it, you know, social media can be like the girls' bathroom.
Yeah, that's like me and Blake, usually.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well, after the compliments
The
on
mirror to my soul.
last podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a bit scary maybe, but I like the idea of doing all those things you said, Ella. Like, ideally out in the open sometimes. Like, it's much more difficult, but I feel like generally I feel socially okay, but it's still a scary thought to just be like, I just want to tell that person that they just look cool. Sometimes you see videos of people going out and filming themselves do it on Instagram.
Yeah.
I don't know how it looks doing it with a GoPro, or like holding your camera up and filming them. But it's still sometimes nice to see when there's clearly not an intent that is seduction, I suppose.
Yeah.
But just telling people that you like their hat or shoes, or how's the book you read, and things like that.
We don't compliment them. Yeah.
I try and do one a day.
Converse.
I was walking home from work a couple of weeks ago, and this woman walked towards me, and I was just like, oh my God, I love your outfit. She was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And it's like, that was such an easy thing for me to say, and it was genuine, because I did like her outfit, but also I know that she's going to go home and be like, oh, this girl said she liked my outfit, and maybe next time she wears it, she's like, someone said they liked my outfit when I wore this. And like, same thing people have said to me. Like, I was in Cambridge a couple of weeks back and it was my birthday. And this guy stopped me in a coffee shop and was like, your hair's fantastic. I was like, thank you so much. I think if we had more of that, there would be so much less loneliness. But there is such a worry to be like, I don't want to encroach on someone's space, or I don't want to be like, seem to be uncool that I'm like talking to a stranger. But it's such a lovely and easy thing to do. I know it sounds, it sounds really difficult, but it's so easy. Like, if my advice for everyone that is listening this week is in the least creepy way possible, just stop someone or message someone on social media and be like, hey, I like this, or I've seen that you're listening to this album, or I've seen that you're reading this book and I like this book too, or your dog's cute. Just, say something to someone. Just talk to people. It's so important.
Yeah. And you don't know where it's going to go.
Exactly.
Like, literally, one of my best mates in the gym, she's absolutely right, insane. Might be on the podcast soon. And she was benching, and I can't even remember how much, but insane amount. And she had this weird thing on the bar. What does she bench? Like, she was warming up with 60, like for reps, and I was like, okay. And she had this like block thing on the bar I'd never seen in my life, so I was like staring at her, like, what is she doing? Watching her form, like, I'm like, okay, I need to do this, that, and the other. And then I was like, what am I doing? I'm probably creeping her out, like staring at her bench form. And then I just went up to her, and I was just like, what is this thing you've got on the bar? And then we ended up chatting, and then we gave each other Instagrams. And then I saw her Instagram. She posted a lot about body transformations and body dysmorphia, etc. And then I just messaged her and said, I find you incredibly inspirational. Like, you actually have, like, I love your page and I love what you've done. And we're literally going out drinking Thursday night with a group of us from the gym now. Like, and that was probably a couple months ago. And now I see her a couple of times a week, and we're good friends, And that's what that compliment, or that even just asking for knowledge, or me messaging her on Instagram, like a follow-up message, caused that.
Yeah.
So you don't even know what that compliment could breed. It could breed a friendship. It could breed. So you've made someone's day. It's so much there. But I also understand that it can, like, it's easier said than done. But it also is that little hop in someone's step that you've helped with that, and maybe you stop them for a second to forget about even feeling lonely if they did. From that compliment. They're seen. They were seen for a moment.
If you want to fight, you've got to get punched in the face occasionally. I think it's that kind of idea of, if you want to interact and connect, you just got to interact and connect. I think we have, there's so many strategies, and it does actually come down to just small steps towards that thing. And I'm also really interested in the idea of like faux virtue, the idea of, or the selfish element of being selfless. This idea that maybe you're doing something because it's a good thing, as opposed to because you believe it's the right thing. Like, again, the perception societally or socially of doing something right. But you know what? If that means you do a good thing, then do it. And I would invite people to maybe selfishly interact with people in the way that you guys have just said, and just be like, if it makes you feel good knowing that you've taken a small step, use me, message me, tell me how handsome I am. If it takes, that small step for you to get better at complimenting other people, do what you need to do, guys.
You've
I could
really
give you
played
other
the
options.
long game on this.
Yeah,
on
no,
this
but I
mission
mean it.
Flirt with Blade,
to request,
please.
Especially,
compliment.
and if there's any mentions of height, you will be blocked. And if anyone mentions my tash being rubbish, you're blocked.
I think we should just change the icon from the happy sad face to just your face
with a mustache.
The Happy Tash Club.
November.
That actually would
work.
be a good name for a club. But you don't need to
That's
say
one of the
anything else
clubs.
up, Blake.
That's one of the clubs I'm doing. I'm doing a Tash Club. So Joe,
Can I
sort
join?
your shit out. Yeah.
Mate, I haven't got the tash. I've got the beard coming.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe no more clubs for a while. No more clubs for a while. But no, I think we've all raised some like really good points, and
yeah, I like
think it's
that
really
you
nice.
I was worried that you were going to start talking about that faux virtue and sort of tread on it. But I also fully agree that
Not at all.
that to do those kind of things that they talk about, they're not being like a fully, altruistic act. But I think that's completely fine. I feel like if everyone can win, then surely it's better. Really, like
I agree.
It's not just the case that one person has to feel better from a situation for the other person to have been virtuous. Like,
Completely.
if it makes you like, I definitely get a buzz if I just have like a random exchange with like anyone, just day to day that I didn't expect to have that day. And if it goes well, that is, as long as I'm not like stumbling on my words and being well awkward, then I walk away from it.
It's still a connection, isn't it? As awkward as it may be.
Yeah.
And
I think
you underestimate the ability to be awkward, Ella. Not of my own, but obviously I speak of others.
In any normal situation, anyone that's a good, compassionate individual would appreciate the gesture and your intentions.
Yeah,
and I know that each of us would do our very best to make that person feel as welcome as possible. I really do believe that in most people, courage is learned. It's not just acquired miraculously or born within us. It's, we're not all Maximus. We are each individuals who has to accumulate courage and bravery. And I think that there are certain things in life that you simply just have to slowly expose yourself. And that doesn't mean that everyone's race is the same. That doesn't mean that we all do, whatever ABC tells us to do. You have to figure that out, and you have to be willing to get it wrong. But you have to be willing, And I think it comes back to the idea of like, what is lonelier, to grieve or not love anyone enough to? It's like, I suppose I could perceive that the same way as these sorts of things. Like, what's worse, to have not connected by not trying, or to have not been able to connect through trying? It's like, at least you can say you tried. At least you can accumulate some evidence, that you have that potentially in you to connect. I don't know. It's nice. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add? I have a quote from the Bible.
Oh.
Slap me with the Bible. Let's go.
The Church of
And
England
God
primary
said-
school's coming out.
I'll get my Chris Dingle ready. I'm actually squishing a ball. I've just, for those of you listening, I've just squeezed the goo out of a stress ball, which I'm very unhappy about. So I've been climbing, so my grip's got really strong. But the quote from the Bible is, God said, open quote, and it is not good man should be alone. And it was actually the first thing that God considered unfavorable in his creation was the feelings of loneliness. So anyone religious listening to this can tell me I'm wrong. I would love to know that I'm wrong, because then it's an opportunity to connect and converse on these topics that I find completely fascinating.
Yeah.
Point in case. But yeah, does anyone have anything they'd like to add or finish with?
I think
Just that.
Sorry, go on.
You.
I was going to say, I think we wanted to maybe try ending the pod with some recommendations, whether that's like TV, music, poetry, art, anything that we've been enjoying. I think that would be a good segment to add to the pod.
Brilliant. Take it away, Ella.
Oh, God. I haven't thought about it.
Okay, I have one.
Yeah, go for it.
Take a breath. I'll include the book that I mentioned, which is, I want to reiterate it, A Philosophy of Loneliness by Lars Svensson. It's a very philosophical telling. It's full of statistics, and it's very important in restructuring our perceptions of what loneliness is. And I think that I'd advise anyone that's experiencing it and is willing to kind of challenge their perceptions to give it a read. It's a really nice book, really easy. And I think it just touches on some really, really nice things. And it pulls in, again, religion, society, things like that, philosophy, literature, and it just fuses things into such a lovely, even quotes, I think, Crime and Punishment. And it's just a really cool book. And I think that as someone that has experienced a serious amount of loneliness throughout the years and quite likes to dig into themselves and read, it was the perfect text. So that's my contribution.
That's like my cup of tea. My contribution is sharing food. My contribution isn't the music. It's
Nice.
if you're going to do something, one thing, and I literally done a whole weekend of it. I was with my partner and his best mate from Spain and all the gym lot. But all weekend it was about food and being together, and food was the thing that brought us together. And like I cooked us a massive fry up on Sunday, and everyone came over, and then we danced to soul and funk music whilst cleaning up, and it was great. And I think food is a beautiful way. Invite your friends over for breakfast or for dinner and share, and then clean up together, listen to the music extra loud. Like it's like, do something that is, the simplicity in that is stunning, and I think that's my contribution to maybe fighting loneliness, but also creating a simple but beautiful connection with your friends.
Your tapas bias though, if your partner's from Spain. You're trying to promote sharing small plates.
No, should probably look into that.
Fine,
No, I'm much
fine.
better
We'll come
cook
for
than he is,
dinner.
may I just say.
Yeah, is that an open invite or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
come
fine.
over.
We'll come to Bristol for dinner.
You're not always welcome. You know that. All of you. Yeah.
I'm gonna
You go.
again, Ella. I'll go
Sorry,
this time.
the brain.
That's all right. No, it's my turn.
Go on, Joe.
You go. I'm...
I'm gonna wait for you to talk again and then jump in again. Yeah, I'm gonna steal Blake's one. And take it from me because I don't do this myself, but I think once a day trying to do one of those little. It can be someone you even like. Let's say you're in a workplace. There'll be plenty of people around that. Some maybe you speak to often. Some maybe you've introduced yourself to on your first day, and then never said another word to them. I know there's plenty of those in my workplace, but if you see anything about them that you like or anything that just you're curious about, just start a conversation, really. Sounds cliche, but I think it's definitely a simple one that I don't do enough myself and would like to. I think sometimes you can catch yourself maybe not feeling in a super sociable mood, and so you just think the last thing I want to do is this right now. And I'm not even sure if there's an antidote to that in that moment, but I'm sure sometimes there's nothing like a little conversation to make you kind of snap out of whatever you're feeling, and you don't even realise that it's happened. So increase your chances of that happening, I suppose.
I think that's a good shout. My recommendation is I think everyone should read The Wind in the Willows because it's a gorgeous, gorgeous book about community and friendship and working together, and just in the backdrop of like the most beautiful descriptions of the countryside and the river. And I think it's a really lovely anti-lonely book.
Beautiful end. Love it. Yes.
That's good, and thank you for those that prompted and responded to the things we shared. We do want to kind of mix these things up, and obviously the podcast format will kind of ebb and flow. We don't have any real structure, but if you do have anything you'd like us to share or talk about, any topics, any questions, feel free to share them with us, either via the Happy Sad Club, or for those of you that know us individually, feel free to contact us individually, and we'd be happy to explore those things. And we invite you to carry on listening. And for those of you that want to share, please again get in touch with us. Whether that be the smallest or the largest thing. If you just want to talk, let us know, and we'll either respond or guide you to the right people to do that. But for those of you here today, Raffan, Ella, Joe, Blake, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah.